Hello, and welcome back to another edition of the Wildside Chat. Today we're going to be talking about Azul Skull, and just a quick reminder, the Wildside Chat is going to be a video for every single card in the game, starting with items, then clunkers, then companions, aiming to be between 3 and 10 minutes of discussion. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get straight into it. Azul Skull, first and foremost, is a card that must be targeted on an ally, and then it applies 4 Overburn to the front enemy. So a couple things to note here. A, it has to be targeted onto an ally. It automatically kills that ally when it's targeted, triggering, of course, sacrifice synergies. And I should also note that this is a Shademancer exclusive card. And then it's applying 4 Overburn to specifically the front enemy. So there is that restriction applied to it, but it makes sense for a card that's targeted onto something else entirely. So a couple of things to note right away. It is tied with Bebop Mask for the highest base Overburn application in the game. Azul Battle Axe, for example, base of application is 3. The Candle has 0. Vesta has 0. Shen has 1. And leaders have, I think, between 1 and 3 Overburn as well, those Overburn heroes. And Azul Skull is at 4, along with Bebop Mask. And it makes sense because both Bebop Mask and Azul Skull have conditions to be met to apply this 4 Overburn. And if you think about this in the base case, you are taking essentially 2 turns in a lot of cases to trigger this. You are summoning something and then killing it in order to sacrifice it to do 4 Overburn to the front enemy. It is a strong effect, but you do have to keep that in mind when you're playing some of these skull cards or sacrifice cards in general. There is a lot more opportunity cost that comes with sacrifice cards because A, you're removing something on your field that has some power, and B, it takes a turn to create that thing. So what are the cases when this becomes pretty powerful? Well, it becomes more powerful when those conditions that have to be met are either easier to be met through things like Cheeky Chi. If you think about Cheeky Chi, most summons, you play the card, it costs a turn, and now you have a summon. This includes Blank Mask, this includes Shade Wisp, this includes Jun Mask, includes all the masks. And then you play this, and yeah, that's essentially 2 turns. With Cheeky Chi, you are getting sort of 5 turns worth of sacrificing on this one card, which is very valuable. It's 6 if you want to sacrifice your 10-10. That's like you usually don't want to sacrifice your 10-10. But so Cheeky is a very efficient sacrifice target for that reason. Additionally, there are cards that synergize specifically with sacrifice. So things like Groff and Devacrow, as examples, love when things get sacrificed. So it almost becomes less of a detriment. You're removing a card from your a pool of stats on the battlefield. Usually that would be bad, but with Groff and Devacrow, you're getting a benefit from that. You're kind of taking one loss and turning it into a gain. So these are some of the conditions that you are more attracted to things like Azul Skull and the other Skull cards in general. So I would say this card can be kind of hard for me to evaluate early in the game. I'm talking about in the base case when you have nothing in your deck, and then you've completed the first combat, you go into the first treasure. You have nothing but your starting deck, and you see this card. How good is it? It's a good question, because pretty much your only target right now at this point, unless you want to sacrifice your companion, which can be good sometimes, is Jun. So there's no synergies propping it up. Like there's no efficient sacrifices. There's no benefits to sacrificing at this point. But you are getting 4 Overburn on the front enemy. But let's say you go into the second combat with just this card, in addition to the base deck. You play, and then you draw this, and you don't draw Jun. This is now a dead card. Essentially, this is a dead card unless you want to use it on your companion. And you may not have even drawn your companion in the first draw. Which, dead cards are bad. I would say, in general. So I would say I'm generally not considering this early, but it is potentially adding a lot of value to your deck and begins the base for building Overburn, which can be a very powerful quote-unquote archetype. It's important to note that archetypes are sort of a trap. You shouldn't go into a game saying, hey, I really want to build an Overburn deck, or I really want to build a Shroom deck, or anything like this. What you want to do is build a deck that defeats the fights that are in front of you. That is the only thing you should be thinking about. And yes, synergies build up other cards. 2 cards with the same keyword, such as Overburn, often are better having the other one alongside it. But you don't need to overdo it, and you don't need to force it. These are important things to keep in mind when you are building your deck. You simply want to have the numbers. This game is all about numbers. You just want to have the numbers to defeat A, the fight in front of you, and B, all of the following fights, and ultimately the final fight, the heart. So all of these things should be in your mind when you're choosing cards. I would say if you have pretty much no good options in that first treasure, then maybe you should consider this. But there are lots of other cards that are going to be better in the base case than this card because of the reasons I've outlined, the conditionals, as well as the possibility of it being a dead card. If you do get Junjun and Azul School in the first hand, then suddenly this becomes pretty powerful, because in the base case this can do up to 12 damage on its own. So you apply 4 Overburn to the thing, you chip it down to 4, and then it explodes and does 12 damage. That's quite strong. If you remember, this is equivalent to Azul Battle Axe in its good cases, and that's quite strong. It's just harder to get this thing going. Now, once you have some of the tools that I've talked about, some of the synergies, such as Chi, Groth, Devacrow, things like this, or you have lots of fodder for sacrifice, this becomes much more valuable. And I'm getting more excited about taking this card, especially alongside other Overburn synergies. So that's the bulk of what I wanted to say. I guess I'll add on. I would probably not take this if I have Van June. There's sort of some anti-synergies and synergies within the Shademancer clan. There are sort of multiple paths that you can go, one being a sacrifice-based path, and one being there's more than these 2, by the way, but these are 2 kind of opposing synergies. One being a sacrifice-based path with things like Groth and Devacrow, perhaps, and then a more summon-based path where you're buffing your summons via Van June. This card works against the summoning buffing path because you're killing probably a summon that is getting empowered. So I would say usually you avoid when you have Van June as a primary source of your offensive and defensive engines. Additionally, I will say this card is the only Overburn card that can utilize Crit Charm, and that is quite powerful. If you can get this to 8, that is becoming a much stronger card. Additionally, you can have things like Lumen Vase on this, and the Overburn that you're putting out is quite formidable. So some things to keep in mind. So a card that requires conditions, but can be quite powerful if those conditions are met, and can be a really important base for your Overburn scaling later in the game. But not required. Not required by any means. It sort of just depends where your deck's at. And I would be cautious of this without those conditions being met, I would say. And later in the game, if you already have a pretty much solution built for Overburn, and you're not really able to just sacrifice things willy-nilly, then you don't need to take this by any means. It might not be adding any value to your deck, even if you're Overburn based, if you don't have sufficient fodder for this to kill. So that about covers Azul Skull. Once again, these are my opinions, and this is a card I think that's a bit harder for me to evaluate than some of the previous ones. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Feel free to leave any feedback, any interactions about this card that I may have missed, or why you agree or disagree. Thanks so much, as always, and have a wonderful rest of your day.